What's up and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Connie Diekman. Connie is a registered dietitian that has spent close to 30 years working in media to help educate the public on food and nutrition. She has appeared on the Oprah Show, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and CNN. She was also the director of university nutrition at Washington University in St. Louis, and she has consulted with food companies, government agencies, and physicians' offices. Big thanks to Connie for coming on our show. For more information about her services, you can check out her website, cbdiekman.com. We'll have that linked in the description below. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Connie. I wanted to ask the way that I start out all of these podcasts, because I did some reading on you. I really, like we talked about before we got on, it's obviously this has been something that's been very fulfilling for you, your career. You've done a lot. So I'd like to start people out with just an easy question, which is, who are you and why you do what you do?
It's not an easy answer, though.
It never is. It never is. The most interesting people, that's the hardest for them to answer.
So Connie Diekman, registered dietitian. I've been one for a very long time. I'm based here in St. Louis, and my career has been diversified. I started out in lipid research at Washington University Medical School, which was really very focused on a federal grant and, very specific nutrition intervention. But I think that was nice for a foundation because it wasn't the hospital based where you don't have time to talk to people and, you have to give them what the doctor says you have to do. Whereas in the grant, we really got to know people. We got to talk to them. We got to help them make change. And it was during that I recognized a part of our training at that time didn't have any emphasis on behavior change. It kind of was like behavior change, but not how to. So that's what pushed me to go back and get my master's in counseling so that I had those techniques as a part of what I do. After leaving the med school, I went into practice for myself and did a variety of things here in St. Louis. So we had at that time a very large federal government facility in the city. Like thousands of people, and they had wellness programs, which was really impressive to me. And so I would do weekly classes on healthful eating and, group classes, and it reinforced that piece about people care, but they need help on how to change. They don't just need you to say, okay, here's what we know, do it. And then at that time also is when I got involved in the media here in St. Louis. So I did TV in St. Louis for, I don't know, I haven't added it up, but a lot of years, being an on-air nutrition reporter. Started back at Washington University, but this time on their main college campus in 2000 as director of university nutrition, which again allowed me to work with the students, to work with our dining staff and really talk about, here's what we know. Here's what we need to help people understand. What can we serve them? Or how can you structure your eating? Or as we talked with athletes, what does this mean in terms of how you need to fuel your body? So it was the relationship piece, I think, that really makes it exciting.
Oh, of course. What were you limited by? What wall were you running up against when you realized, okay, I need to go back and I need to get this master's degree in counseling so I can really communicate this more effectively?
I think one of the hardest things is we are so trained in science. You look at our curriculum and, it's heavy science. So you understand how science works, but it becomes that kind of like back here drives you all the time and you forget. The average consumer doesn't have that. So when I was trying to, teach people the science, they would invariably, well, what do I get to eat? And that was the piece that was missing. Okay, how do yes, it was the translate. So, how do you take it from fatty acids to what that is in the food? But more importantly, it was, where are you with your ability to change? What's important to you? Do you want to give up X or do you want to give up Y, or do you want both? And therefore we don't eat as much as both. So not understanding that, behavior change is a process. It's slow. It kind of is like a roller coaster. You do well, then you fall, and then you do well. And that's what I recognize. Okay, I don't have the I had the instinct, but I wasn't comfortable with that. I wanted the knowledge base, which would affirm that my instinct was okay.
Yeah,
That
I
makes
think
sense.
no, it does. And I think that kind of ties right back into the issue of, well, it's not so much an issue, but science is very comforting, I think, to us, including myself, who are very science minded. It's very comforting. Okay, this is as much as we know right now, the facts of the universe, the way things work. And granted, you have to have the wherewithal to allow that to be falsified, of course, because that's part of the scientific process. But I think that it's just more comforting for us as health and fitness professionals, nutrition professionals, to fall back on those. And then, you know, you were saying, speaking to the average public who may not have, not only do they maybe not have any scientific literacy, but they don't really need to. Like you are that liaison between them. You know, granted, I would like to think in 2022, everybody has a good scientific understanding, or at least, you know, the scientific process, because you have to understand, you know, even scientists are going to be wrong. So I think, I mean, we're going to keep whittling away at this, but I think it really does come down to often our identity as professionals gets so wrapped up in what we know. And it's scary to tell somebody that we don't know, but we'll guide them, or, you know, we don't know the answer, but we'll find it. So I'm glad to be talking with you about this today.
Yeah. You know, you said something there that kind of did a flashback thing. When I did TV here in St. Louis, I used to say to my dietitian colleagues when I would speak about, you know, you can be on TV, anybody can do this, that one of the biggest faults, health professionals, I did try to interview, obviously, because I was doing the nutrition stories, more dietitians, but it holds true for all of us. One of the biggest faults is we need to tell people everything we know. Like you said there, we know all that science and it moves us, and we know it's going to make a difference. But you know what? People don't want to hear it. They want to know we know it. They want to trust that we're coming to them from a knowledge base. They don't need to hear it to be comfortable with us. Yeah. And that was always so evident. I do interviews, you know, of colleagues, and you'd ask a simple question and the answer would go like this, and I'd go back and edit it down to like this.
Yeah, I heard something today that on a podcast about marketing, actually, but I think the same holds true, because it's really based in human behavior, just like these kinds of changes are. And the idea that it's incredibly easy to make something more complex. Everybody can make something more complex, but making it more simple is really kind of the mark of somebody who has thought through this in an intelligent way. And it's the old saying, right? That make something as simple as possible, but no more. And that's that line that you have to walk. And I think that's when it becomes more of an art than a science. But again, it comes back to the science is so comforting, because it really does. I mean, thank goodness we're at the point where there's been scientific research within nutrition and things like that for the last, you know, building upon the last couple hundred years, thank goodness. And we're still at the forefront of it, I think. And people like you are obviously pointing out that the X's and O's are somewhat figured out. I think the nutrition principles are relatively figured out. It's applying them with people. That's kind of, it seems to be like the next kind of forefront, frontier for this space.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation around personalized nutrition, and you know, we definitely are just kind of sitting on the edge because we don't know enough. You know, we all thought before the genome map was mapped out that, oh, once we get the genome mapping, everything will be perfect. I'll be able to tell you exactly what to do. You know, unfortunately, what it demonstrated is it's only more complicated than we thought it was. And that's always going to be a factor. And I know, you know, because I see this in students. I know when we come out of school, it's like, nope, this is what I learned, and therefore you must do. But what we forget is every human body is different. So yes, the foundation doesn't change. I mean, you know, we know protein does this, and we know carbs are good for that, but which protein you need, how much you need, which carbs, how much, that's individual. And the challenge with that, of course, is we're a population of a whole lot of people, and there aren't that many of us to help every individual. So we always go back to the dietary guidelines, which obviously are totally grounded in evidence. And I definitely, you know, use those as a reference point. But the individualization isn't as simple. I think with technology, that even will get better. You know, you look at what you can do with the Dietary Guidelines website, My Plate right now versus where it was 5 years ago. You can do some individualization. You know, you can see, oh, I don't like this. Can I eat something else?
Yeah.
So I have hope that that will kind of fill the gap, because again, you look at in the United States, we're about 110,000 registered dietitians.
Ooh.
That's kind of a gap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, we partner with professionals like you and you know, with our other peers who are in the food fitness space. But hopefully when it comes down to something very health specific, our partners recognize, hey, let's make sure the dietitian is in the mix.
Yeah.
But when it's more general, okay, what do I need to do, you know, just to have a healthy lifestyle? We can say to our peers, our colleagues, okay, you guys know their fitness routine. You guys know their lifestyle routine. I trust you to give them guidance, and I'll stay over here and help those who are a little more complicated. You know, it's a partnership kind of thing.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that that positioning by fitness professionals, personal trainers, coaches, things like that, I think that developing, I kind of look at it like a multidisciplinary team on a very low scale, of course, but I do feel personal trainers can be looked at as part of the entryway into the healthcare system. But I will be the first one to admit that we have not taken our professions as seriously as we can. And granted, not every personal trainer needs to be at that level to where they could interact with physical therapists and dietitians and things like that. But there's certainly this large swath of us who are just completely unaware of some of these basic principles and also how to apply them. But I wanted to ask, because you mentioned you seemed a little bit optimistic about some of the you specifically within the ability to individualize nutrition and things like that. Is there anything on the horizon for the nutrition space that you are really looking forward to optimistically?
I do think the personalized nutrition piece is going to be interesting. I on the flip side, though, I think unfortunately it's still a fair distance away. I feel like we've made progress the last maybe 15 years. I think that's when we first started looking at this as a possibility, but we're still just not quite there. I do think, at least what I'm seeing thus far as it relates to, you know, the dietary guidelines come out every 5 years. And even though 2020 isn't that far away, we're already looking at 2025. The questions for 2025 have already come out for input from everybody. And so when I looked at the questions they've put out for 2025, the questions are a bit broader. So they're looking at it as what people eat. You know, for a long time, because of course nutrition is a science, we talk about the nutrients, you know, what the body needs to be healthy, and you can't ignore that. But the consumer probably doesn't need to hear all of it, but we need to do a better job translating the foods to reflect those nutrients. So the questions tie more to like diet patterns and, you know, how should you eat? So there we get to that. It's not going to be personalized as in every individual, but it'll be better than just, okay, here's your plate. This is what you should do. Now that's hopeful. We'll see what 2025 brings, but the questions at least lead kind of to that thought.
I think that going down the rabbit hole, because it can end up being a rabbit hole, and it can be a dangerous rabbit hole of focusing on, okay, I learned about this new nutrient. Oh, I need to focus on that. You know, where am I getting my resveratrol from? All that. And I think people get really, really focused in, and the average person, I think, like you said, dietary patterns, dietary habits, what are these things that you can do to where you don't even have to think about it? It's just a pattern that you follow. And I think that, I mean, it's clear that people hunger for that, though, no pun intended, because they, you know, jumping on fad diets. Okay, I need this answer. And then somebody presents to them this answer that may have worked for them, or, you know, worked for them despite, you know, they may have survived it despite. And then that's kind of comforting to us. And I think that a lot of it, the human behavior comes down to, you know, comfort versus discomfort on some scale. That's awesome. I think that there are really some intriguing things coming out, and the fact that they are now so they would come up like with a list of questions, and then over the next few years, people are researching it and trying to find answers to modify things. That's good. It's interesting that it takes place on that scale, because I think people want answers now. They want that next. I mean, I was the same way. I would see a research study that came out about, I would like to talk about lipids at some point, ask you a few questions about lipids, but I'd see something about a specific kind of fat that's supposed to cause inflammation. And then it's like, avoid that at all costs. But gosh, it's interesting. And I'm coming out, you've seen much more than this than I have, but coming out of the 90s, being a 90s kid, I was just talking about this with my girlfriend, avoided fat at all costs, avoided anything over a couple hundred calories at all costs. I remember we were talking about, she would get a smoothie from Smoothie King because it was 300 calories and she could have a meal for 300 calories. Yeah. And we looked at the macronutrients yesterday and had 2 grams of protein. But I was in that same trap. I know many people are in that same trap. It's lowest calories at all costs. What is this, the latest fad diet that's going to get me there, and things like that. So I'm excited to see. I'll be counting down to 2025. We'll see what they put out, because that My Plate was a refreshing modification, because when I first learned nutrition in high school, or the basics of nutrition, it was still the pyramid. And then the My Plate was, like you said, it allows some individualization, and it allows them to have flexibility. They can realize, okay, this is fulfilling this requirement or need or want even. How can I swap that out with something else? Exactly.
And I think your points there as far as the nutrients is so important. When we share the science, so again, you talk in terms of carbohydrates, because they still remain kind of a hot button in our world. Carbohydrates are your body's fuel. I mean, that's where we get glucose. Straight, pure, simple, no arguments. That's where we get fuel. So it's not carbohydrates that are the problem. It's, oh, gee, I went to the pasta restaurant and the bowl they brought me was this big, or that bagel that I get, is now like 3 slices of bread instead of the original little New York water bagels, or I'm doing all those coffee drinks with all that sugar and so forth and so forth. So it's that personal choice piece that we've got to help people understand. It's not the carb that's, and I shouldn't use the words bad, because nothing is bad, but it's not the carb that's the problem. It's how did you bring them into your eating plan? And then you also hit something so very, very important. We know nutrient-wise, they all work in a balance in our bodies. I mean, there's, sodium and potassium are all about fluid balance. And then, that's why if you overhydrate and you throw off that sodium potassium balance because you didn't do electrolytes at the same time as you're doing water, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to flush the sodium, and now you've got an imbalance. And when people did jump on, they say this nutrient's good or this nutrient's bad, you're changing how the body functions. Calcium and vitamin D are partners. Without them together, your bones aren't going to strengthen. So if you're supplementing with vitamin D off the chart, but you don't have enough calcium, it's not going to do you any good.
Yeah. And I mean, those are things that, again, the dietary pattern should, for the most part, take care of. And granted, there's no shortage of people out there, or naturopaths and things, that are willing to test you until you have a nutrient deficiency or a intolerance or something. But in reality, again, it's the patterns, it's the basic stuffs. And I mean, with your experience in this field, like, you still will not necessarily rely upon, but utilize the recommendations, the RDAs and things, because they are a great place to start with.
Well, and they do reflect the science. And to your point of earlier, yes, we've had tremendous amount of research, but we do need more. And there is a push to have federal funding for a Department of Nutrition in NIH, where we're doing more nutrition research. But as with everything at the government level, gets hung up in a lot of places, but then the funding piece becomes an issue as well. There is one piece of good news, at least, and that is that the White House has said they will convene in September a White House conference on food nutrition, and that, because we haven't done one in, gosh, I forget how many years.
Oh no, that's not good.
a lot of years. So, that will be helpful, and hopefully that will draw enough attention that maybe then the funding would be allocated to the nutrition research at NIH, because our bodies are extremely complex. They're amazing. Just to think in terms of how they can do what they do. As I tell my students all the time, your body is a heck of a lot smarter than you, and it's going to do whatever it takes to survive.
Yes, and that's where the nutrition science comes back in. I have a cognitive biases that I try to temper as much as possible, but kind of looking back to evolutionary biology and again, we're biological systems. Yeah. What are some basic principles that we can rely upon, and that's useful for changing body composition, that's useful for building muscle, that's useful for a lot of things. And I think that oftentimes, again, we get caught up in the fads and the fancy things. Right. One aside before I have a serious question. You mentioned the White House. I've often wondered this, do you have any idea what the diet, is there a dietitian in charge of that? What's being served to the president and these higher up people? I've wondered, are they eating well?
They are different. Each White House has is able to do on their own. I think it was when Obama was there that he did utilize, because of course Michelle Obama was very involved with Partnership for a Healthier America, and actually was pretty connected to the DC office of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So she was very much an open ear. So dietitians were involved at that time. I don't know current status. I know that there are many on the White House team who are very focused on nutrition and very concerned, which is of course why we were able, not we, because it was a combination of a multitude of nutrition organizations who made the request, but how they were able to get the White House to agree that we need to do this conference. It's been too long since we've looked at. And then obviously, where we are currently, many of us here don't probably think about the fact, but food availability, we all know in the grocery store it's expensive, but the availability piece is likely going to be challenged the longer things go in the Ukraine. The amount of food that comes out of the Ukraine is pretty significant. And while we may not see as much of it on our shelves, it goes into a lot of the products that are made. You look at just the recent bringing the baby formula from Germany, that came from Nestle. Well, Nestle puts more into our food supply than just specialized formulas. So the conflict in Ukraine is going to impact. So looking at in the fall, food security is going to be extremely important. We in this country are already having some food security issues. And unfortunately, it's going to get complicated with rising cost and now this conflict.
Yeah, and I think this time more than any other time that I can think of, I think it irks me more than any other time that there's this kind of elitism within within our diet, to where people are, you have to eat all raw liver, you have to eat all raw meat, or you have to eat all or you have to eat all organic, non-GMO, all this stuff. And you're putting all of these barriers to people to where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to that packaged food that I can feed my whole family. And again, coming back to these principles, it's really upsetting to me when there's all these companies selling these expensive green powders and stuff, but it's like, oh gosh, people cannot afford the staples right now. That's You're going to tell them. But again, I mean, this is just anecdotal, but I mean, we've really monitored our food budget, and I've had no changes to my body composition. I'm still finding vegetables, but again, it's coming down to what are the basics? What are the basic principal inputs that I need, or nutritional inputs that I need? Okay, so we move on from there. So we were talking about this huge gap in between the science and what gets relayed to the average person. Why is that gap there? We know so much about nutrition. We're learning so much. Why is it so hard to bridge that gap?
I think there's a couple things going on there. Number one, all of us who understand the science need to remember that consumers, and this is going to sound negative, but I don't mean it to be negative. I mean it to be, this is a fact. They don't care about the science. They truly, like the clients used to say to me, what do I get to eat? So we need to remember that our responsibility is to talk about Tell me about what you eat. What do you like? What are your goals? Okay, now how do we revamp to achieve your goals? So keeping the science as a part of how we think in our interactions is our priority. So that's, number one. Number two, we need to do a better job as, again, professionals in the food fitness world to communicate with the media what the evidence shows. As you said, not talking about the latest, greatest fad.
Yeah.
Our problem is talking the evidence doesn't always get you the clicks. It doesn't always get you the followers. It doesn't always make you the influencer. From our side of things, we have a code of ethics that we are supposed to adhere to. And that code of ethics says we need to speak the evidence, not whatever else is out there. So we need to, with the media, help them. One of the things, and I think we kind of in email talked about this, one of the things that I still do is for reporters, I do translate new studies and give them my input as it relates to, what is this really saying? The recent one, looking at the coffee and cholesterol. That's another one of those, every scientist, it seems like that's probably an overstatement, but every scientist in this country is constantly doing research and putting out new studies, and single studies do not a body of evidence make.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to do a better job communicating to media. Here's what we know. Here's what this single study shows us. Here's what you as the consumer should do. Now you got to do that in a, 10-second soundbite, but we need to do a better job with that. And then I think the other thing is we probably as a society need to keep advocating for more friendly science. I'm not sure how else to say that in the education system. I look at my own daughter who, she was not into science. She's a very creative young woman. And, that's the side of her brain that's very, very strong. But of course, in education, you have to take science in high school. Well, can't we have courses that are more friendly to those who don't want to be a science-based professional, but they have to meet that requirement? So make it life science. Don't make it something that's boring and they don't want to hear. So I think it's really about those three things. We need to understand how to better communicate. We need to make sure the media hears from us and we do that better. And then we help the consumer by having a bit more basic education.
I think that's a fantastic plan. And as somebody who nearly failed every science class in high school, and then I've got about 80% of my biology degree done with like a 3.9 or 4.0, like it's certainly doable, but I would completely agree that they are putting people off of science at a young age. We are putting people off of science at a young age.
Yep.
How do you go about then? Because you mentioned, a single study does not a body of evidence make, nor does a meta-analysis or anything on that level as well. Those are definitely better. How do you detail this hierarchy of evidence? Because like, I'm sure that there's always, they're holding up this one study and it's like, okay, that study shows an effect, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's, significant or anything like that.
Yeah.
For you, how do you go about explaining that hierarchy of evidence? Because I think people's eyes just kind of glaze over once you start going into it.
They do. And heck, even my students' eyes glazed over when I went through the hierarchy pyramid. We do have a hierarchy as it relates to quality of evidence. Randomized controlled trials sit at the top. Randomized controlled trial means you have two groups of people. One's your test group and one's your control, but everything holds exactly the same except for whatever's being changed. And that's why it's still the gold standard, because you're comparing, what's really changing. So you're looking at lifestyle, you're looking at physical activity, you're keeping both parallel. The problem with it, as you might guess, as I described it, is it's time, it's money. And, again, we don't have a big nutrition research funding coming out of NIH. As you alluded to, meta-analysis, systematic reviews kind of sit up there as well. But the catch with those, of course, is what kind of studies were included. A meta-analysis, in case people don't know, is where you really look at the body of evidence. So you look at the multiple research studies on the topic, and what do you see from those? But again, if you pick all bad studies, and there have been several more than several, there's a lot of meta-analysis that pull bad studies, so they're worthless.
Yeah.
You know, what I tell my colleagues all the time, and I know the consumer can't always do this, but I was trained by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Evidence Analysis Library Director, I guess was her title. I was able to sit in on that. You read the abstract of the study and you get the gist. Okay. And the abstract is the gist. It is not what the study really did. And then I always go to the limitations of the study. And that's where you see, you know, again, the most recent one with the coffee and the cholesterol, you know, it was small numbers, it was short term, it was small impact. You know, that's when you say, okay, this is really helpful, but no, I'm not going to change behaviors based on this single study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tend to go abstract methods to make sure that, because you can really, really quickly see, although you can see that, I mean, granted, they're being forthcoming, that limitation study should tell you just as much as the methods. But I mean, cross-checking those, I think, is incredibly important. But how many times have you seen somebody posting an excerpt just from the abstract? They're not even reading the full text. It's like, oh gosh, you know how people can fudge the numbers, even on a meta-analysis. Like you said, if they don't have good exclusion-inclusion criteria, you may be throwing off your results significantly. And then not to mention that the meta-analysis is, as far as I'm aware, is a whole nother beast in and of itself, knowing which statistics to run, everything like that. So,
well, and I think the other thing that, right or wrong, what people need to remember is researchers who are affiliated with academic institutions, a part of their job expectation is to publish. You know, the phrase publish or perish wasn't created just because it is real. And therefore, you really do need to remember that, again, right or wrong, a researcher goes into a lot of things with a hypothesis, an expectation. And if you don't hit it, sometimes it's hard to write that study up because you know it might not get published.
yeah.
So then you start looking for other, you know, you can massage data. You know, all these terms that we hear in the public, they're real. I mean, they are real. Now, with that said, I don't want people to think we shouldn't trust research, because we have a lot of excellent research going on, not only in this country, but, you know, in several other countries. And we do need to look at the studies. But, you know, the most important thing I would say is, you know, look at, is it a body of evidence? In other words, multiple, or is it single study? Is it a correlation? In other words, I ate a banana and then, you know, I got sunburn. That's not, the banana didn't cause the sunburn, but somebody could write that up because I ate the banana and then I got sunburn. So correlation does not equal causation. And then observational studies, I think, are the other one that we see a lot of. Yeah. And they are exactly what it sounds like. This is what we saw. But again, that doesn't say it happened because of whatever you started with.
Yeah. I think that happens quite a bit, and that correlation does not equal causation has become, within my sphere, a little bit of a buzzword, because people are just like, it's just kind of a flippant way to kind of dismiss something. But do you have any useful tactics? Actually, back on that correlation causation, my favorite example is the ice cream sales and violent crime. That every time I've had any, I just had finished a psychology as a science, which was, gosh, one of the more dry classes I've ever experienced. But it was super helpful, because breaking down each individual section of a study to find those limitations, to find those shortfalls,
that's right,
and to find potentially, because like, how useful is it to be able to look at a study and be like, okay, well, clearly, you know, they did not have a randomized sample. They potentially just had college kids like they typically do. So there's all types of things that can tell you, okay, maybe this isn't really pertinent or you know, relevant to me. Have you found any useful tactics to get people, whether it's the media or anybody else you're engaging with, to kind of take a step back and realize, again, that there is more than one type of study, more than one type of research, and that you should weigh those a little bit differently and consider those a little bit differently?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we've identified any good way. You know, I do think all of us need to continue to do it. And all of us are not. You know, I do catch both RD colleagues, MD colleagues who will make a comment about a study that you can tell either they didn't read it or the comment was taken out of context, which happens, again, I did TV and, I learned how to edit. You can pull out that little piece that you liked and cut off the other parts. So it's really important that we all remember as we speak, that we speak in a way that it reflects what we intend and not put us in a position where you give the reporter what they need. And I do think, as I say that, that's another. I've been lucky in my career. I've only had one reporter who asked me to give an answer the way they wanted the answer to be. But I understand from other colleagues that there are reporters that still do that. And, either no, I won't do the interview, or, my answer is, and just again, now you'll probably get cut and not be used, but maintain your ethics.
Yeah, I mean, I could take this podcast and make it really seem like you've said pretty much anything, but it's clear the way that you speak, that you have gotten used to thinking about what you're going to say. I do the opposite. I like to start a sentence before I know what I'm going to say, because I had problems talking with people. I was never good at speaking with people. And that was one of the tools that I used to get over that, because I figure if I can find myself mid-sentence like I did just there, I'll be able to kind of act on the fly and things like that. But again, if people are scrutinizing every single thing that you say potentially, or misusing it, I think it's my perception that one of the biggest issues with the media is they'll take a study that was looking for an effect, perhaps, certain compound causes cancer, and they do it in a rat study, and they do it at a dosage in which they're trying to find cancer. And then the media or whoever takes that. Is that one of the more common? Are there any other common kind of sleights of hand that typically happen at this level?
No, I think that is a perfect example. And what we need to remember is, most, and having done TV for so many years, the real TV people, the real anchor, they're journalism majors, they are not science majors. So their understanding of the science is not there. So they're going to do what they're given from the press release. They get the press release from the university or from the researcher, and that's what they're going to report. The only thing we can do in those cases, and in a definite, and actually that's how I started my TV career. I commented to a reporter on a story that aired, hey, you missed this or whatever. I don't remember exactly, because it's been a whole lot of years ago, but it was in response to a story that was not quite accurately reported. And sure enough, that got me interviewed more, and as I say, then I did work in the industry. So it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility on social media as well. We talk about TV, and at least what I can gather from my last several years of students, they don't watch the TV news. It's it's probably my generation that's still watching the news. So they're getting it off of social media. And granted, the TV stations end up there, but what we need to be doing on social media is then, when that story comes up, whether it's on, Twitter or Facebook or wherever, and provide that response. Well, this was a single study, or it was a small study, or like you said, it was done in animals, not in humans, and you can't extrapolate from there. Obviously, we can't use the word extrapolate because most people don't know that, but we need
great word though.
We need to take that responsibility. And I think we've lost that in the bigger sphere, which professionally, and I'll say this on the dietitian professionally, is probably why we're getting some challenges at local levels as it relates to who should be giving nutrition advice and who should be licensed to do that, and all of these things, is because if you don't demonstrate value.
I wonder if it would be a useful initiative that news outlets, granted a lot of, like the TV news outlets may be on their way out, but having a nutrition professional that is reliable could be a great, like you, obviously, like at every news outlet, but that's certainly not feasible, especially not with that 110,000 dietitians in the country. But I think that you're absolutely seeing a lot of dietitians with great social media accounts, things like that. So,
right.
I mean, this is just such an interesting time for I think any industry that works with people, because not only are you trying to help the person, but now there's all these other forces that are potentially pushing them in a less than helpful direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many different ways that people are getting their information. Look at, this, look at the podcast arena. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more than that, but you might be able to count them on 2 hands. Whereas now, my students did an assignment was to listen to a podcast that they chose at least twice, if not more, and then bring it back to the class with a report. We didn't have one duplication. Now, we don't have a big class, but still, point is, there's that's another avenue from which people can get information. And then you have, and there's probably more than, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, even TikTok. There's dietitians now using TikTok. So you've got all these different avenues by which people are getting their information, and that certainly is challenging. Yes. Yeah. But with that said, influencers are in all those places. They just need to remember, what is it you should ground yourself in before you simply try to be an influencer in that space.
And I think what you had mentioned at the very beginning about increasing the education within like primary schools, like people at a young age, giving them some of these principles, or at least making them aware, or at the very least making them not turned off by having this curiosity for these basic principles. Because with nutrition, with exercise, with many other things, it benefits you so, like the compound interest on a basic understanding that you need a decent amount of sleep every night. Yeah. That is one of the biggest payoffs that you could possibly have. If you can keep people from being obese in their, teens and 20s, you are then setting them up with potentially, I don't want to say a better trajectory in life, because I feel like that's not for, anyone to decide whether it's a better trajectory, but potentially less problematic in terms of being
the health risk, right?
Chronic, yeah. So I think, it's very interesting.
There's a lot of activity going on, and again, it all comes down to manpower and dollars, but there's a group that is currently sitting under the University of Missouri Extension, but they're called the Missouri Council on Activity and Nutrition. And they have subgroups that are looking at, what is required in schools. Well, they have lots of subgroups, but one is focused on, what is required as it relates to physical activity and what constitutes physical activity. And, but with that said, we know this from any kind of educational standard. You might have the standards or the guidance, but how it trickles down and what happens in every district is not consistent. We see that here in the St. Louis area. What happens in certain areas of the city is different than other areas.
That just segues perfectly into my next question then, which wasn't on the list. In fact, I'm skipping a lot that are on the list because I feel like this is a great thread we're going down. You said that with, at the actual level of practical application of within the education system, that got me thinking to disparities in food availability already, nutrition programs or anything like that. Do you see within the city, but also across the United States, are there big gaps in terms of just like, are people able to get fresh fruits and vegetables? Are they able to get things like that?
Yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, it's a definite problem. And it's a really big problem right now as it relates to our kids, because over COVID, some of the boundaries around school lunch and school breakfast were dropped to ensure that kids could get access to food. Because previous to COVID, there were restrictions in terms of, where you could serve the food and who could qualify for it. So we've lost those boundaries. Some of those waivers are going to expire. Actually, I think it's June 1. And there's great concern what's going to happen to kids' ability to get the food they need to be healthy. The Academy's been working very hard with several of our peer organizations to try to get Congress to look at this and extend these waivers so that our school lunch and breakfast professionals, and actually it extends down, people who get SNAP, supplemental nutrition, so that it extends to some of their limitations as well, so that people can still get access to food. There was a story just the other day. What's currently going to happen is right now schools are getting a nice reimbursement for the meals they serve, that's going to drop like by almost $1 per meal. So when you look at the cost of food, the cost of labor, it's going to impact what school nutrition serves.
Yeah.
A lot of schools in the country, they do backpack meals for the weekend because they know their kids go home and don't always get meals.
And
So they
that's
put
in
meals.
danger.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of kids, as you said, in certain areas, and it's not just cities, it happens in rural areas as well. You know, there's just not the access piece. And then you move out of our kid piece to grocery stores. Yeah, we still have inequity as it relates to what's available. You know, somebody did a study on that recently. You know, in some areas, your fresh produce is coming from, you know, Dollar General, Family Dollar, that kind of thing. So you're very limited on what's there. Tremendous imbalance throughout this country.
And I think that only further speaks to the importance of nutrition professionals or those speaking to the public on this level to bake in and understand and relay that individualized approach or individuality, not for the sake of like, let's optimize your nutrition, but with the understanding that food budgets differ. People are potentially buying food for 4 kids. As somebody who was on reduced lunch as a child, I can only imagine like literally not having food as a kid. Fortunately, we never were at that point, but like could have been knocking on that door.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, we're going into potentially the hardest time for people in a very long time to buy food, and they're dropping these programs. Yeah, that's just this. I mean, there were a lot of government programs that were helping people out that got dropped over the course of these last few years. That I was like, and we probably should keep that going because people need it. But it's
you know, and it's obviously extremely complicated. And you know, we all who are involved in the policy arena, you know, we know that it's a dollar issue, and you know, we can't keep making money in order to pay for things, because of course that's, as I understand it, that's what's getting us in trouble right now, is there's too much money out there and there's nothing supporting those dollars. But we've got to figure out a way to help families feed their kids. You know, they are our future, and if they're not healthy, are we going to go back to how we were, you know, pre-World War II, where lifespan in the state of Missouri, I don't know about where you are, but we've dropped 2 years. Now, COVID is a big player in that, but still, is that what's happening to our overall health? I had an email this morning from a colleague who works here at Washington University Medical School, and she works in the area of type 2 diabetes, which, you know, we used to call the
adult onset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's working in type 2 diabetes in kids.
So we keep coming back to the application level, you know, where the rubber meets the road with people. I have one more question that I wanted to tail off of that, but on the note of childhood obesity, is it a lack of understanding of nutrition principles, or again, is it come back to behaviors? Are there behaviors that kind of tend to underlie that? Is it, you know, economic conditions that are the biggest factor? Is it single parent households that are the biggest factor? What is there in terms of like behavior? It's all of it.
All of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's our kids not going outside to play. It's, you know, it's these things.
Phones.
It's you know, recess in schools. Sadly, in some cities, you know, they're afraid to let kids outside to do recess for safety issues. So it's multiple. You know, you alluded to this very early on. You know, some of our quick serve restaurants, it's cheaper to purchase that, and at least your child has food, as opposed to purchasing you know, lean meats. You know, the good news is, and this is what we've got to keep working, you know, canned beans are really cheap, and canned beans are a wonderful source of protein. You don't need to eat meat if it's too expensive, but people don't know what to do with them. You know, so we got that gap. You know, quick serve restaurants can provide healthful options. We just need to teach people what those are. And somehow or another, we're just not putting all that together.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of going to ask. What are there any glimmers of hope on this front? And I'm sure there are, of course. But in terms of all of these kind of connected but also complex issues, what are some glimmers of hope that you see out there, Connie?
There is interest. We certainly do hear people talking about food, talking about nutrition, talking about health. But I think, what we've got to remember is this is about personal. It is about us hearing the personal and then helping them understand how to execute what they believe in a helpful way. So, if and I had this early in my career, someone said to me, I'm not going to drink skim milk. I'm going to drink whole milk. It's like, okay, fine. You can drink your whole milk, but then we really shouldn't be doing something else. What other fat would you rather not have? Or the college student who told me flat out, every day I have to have a piece of Godiva chocolate. We planned your eating plan with it in there. You can do that. It works just fine. And what's fascinating about that is, and I forget now how many months it was, because she would keep food records for me. It's like, where's your Godiva chocolate? She said, oh, I don't really have to have it every day. She demonstrated that for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we as professionals have to remember, is this is a partnership with our clients. It's not about us telling them, and this, I would say truthfully to everybody, this holds true for all of, whether it's your doctor, your dietitian, your personal trainer. I actually had a student just yesterday tell me that she actually talked back to her personal trainer and said, hey, when you talk about my weight, it makes me uncomfortable. But we have to remember, these are all relationships. It's not authority, lower figure. It's partnership.
It's not a dictatorship. That's funny, because my next question for you, how I kind of wanted to wrap things up, you just ruined it and answered it for me. But I was going to ask you, as people that work with people in this space, again, like personal trainer, dietitian, physical therapist, whatever it is, you said that, the Godiva chocolate was an example. There's a million examples, but I mean, even alcohol. Like I have many clients who have just enjoyed drinking alcohol, and I almost had to pry that from them and investigate because they were somewhat ashamed, or they thought I would tell them not to. But it's like, I don't get anything out of this relationship that isn't dictated upon your progress, your success. Like, I'm not getting anything. I don't care if you drink alcohol. I mean, I would care if you drink alcohol every night, but me telling you not to isn't going to solve that problem. You telling them not to have that the whole milk, not going to solve that problem. But I don't know. I think it's because, again, we come back and we rely on that science, and we think that if they're deviating from the consensus of what's good for human health or nutrition or weight loss or whatever the goal is, that we are doing them a disservice, and that our goal is to kind of shepherd them in the right direction and keep them on track. But it's about, I think it's guiding.
We are totally about helping them. We are totally about helping them. But what we have to remember is what we perceive as helping them may not be what they perceive. And certainly, as I deal with the alcohol issue, and obviously being in a college situation, sometimes it really was an issue. But, I would educate my females for sure that, evidence does indicate it's probably not our best choice. But if you're going to do it, and then we go into the how to do it. So you give them information, but you give it to them. You don't tell, like you said, you don't say you can't do that.
The authoritarian approach, it's not, it's funny because at the baseline, it doesn't work really good. It's funny because at the baseline across these industries, again, the nutrition space, the fitness space, the rehab space, everything, you are working with people. So it's interesting that across the board, professionals are coming to this reality that, gosh, I understand my profession. I don't understand people to the degree that I need to be able to evoke these changes from people. And again, that's another great word that I like, that I think fits this very well, is evoking things. You're not, manipulating them. You're not trying to control them. You are, like you said, you mentioned that you can have that chocolate, you can have these things, and then come down the road, you may not even want it. Like, it's not that. There's so much interesting thought patterns that go into this. I mean, for me personally, it was candy. I didn't have like a binge eating issue at this point, but I still wouldn't allow candy in the house because I'd had binge eating issues in the past with it, and refused to have it. And actually, Dr. Gabrielle Fondero, I started working with her and like realized, okay, actually the problem is telling myself that I can't have it, because then when I do have it, it becomes this problem.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can do as professionals in this space that to just kind of step up the bar a lot. And this is, I think, at kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, and it really does come down to that, we are there for the client. It is about their goals, and it's really listening to hear what are their goals. In other words, they may come in and say, I need X, Y, and Z, but you start listening and you really hear, oh, it's not quite what they said up here. And I think that we use the term active listening, but bottom line is just really being engaged and hearing what they're bringing forward, or like you said, the hesitancy to bring it forward because what if somebody criticizes me for it? If you hear that, we need to say, I sense some apprehension. You want to share, or should we talk about, so that they really understand we're there to help them.
Mm-hmm. I think that your student that talked back to her trainer deserves a round of applause, because that absolutely took some courage, because that's one of the things that bothers me the most. I've found over the last few years, complimenting somebody in a positive way on their weight, that may end up being problematic, let alone talking about it in a degrading way. But
she did a great job.
Yeah, I know.
We talked about it about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. And she said to me just yesterday when we talked, she said, I talked to him and told him, and he actually changed how he interacted with her at their last training session.
And hopefully
so it helped him.
Yeah, hopefully other clients as well, right? Hopefully that kind of sets in and realizes, because not everybody's going to say anything. But Connie, this was an amazing conversation. It was great talking with you. Like I said, we skipped a lot of questions, but like as you were talking, I want to go down that route.
Sorry about that.
No, not at all. I think that's how the best conversations go. But I wanted to end. Do you have any place that you'd like to send people? Any resources that you'd recommend?
Well, I do have my website, cbdiekman.com. It's pretty simple.
We'll link to it.
And then the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, eatright.org.
Gotcha.
I'll get it. I just click it. It's bookmarked on my computer. Eatright.org.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll link to all of those in the show notes.
And then the dietary guidelines.
Excellent.
I think those are great places for people to go.
Well, thank you very much, Connie. We'll point them in your direction. And again, it was great talking with you. I hope to talk with you again someday.
That would be great. I would love it. You do a wonderful job doing this. Thank you.
Appreciate it.